Welcome to the Connected Leadership Live. We're finishing this run up to Easter with a final live broadcast, and from the response that we've had on LinkedIn and Facebook to the preview of this one, that's really engaging a lot of people's interest. Couple of apologies to start off with. Number one, we are running late going live. Technology decided to play an April Fool's on us, and it took us quite a while to get the connection working. And secondly, it's a sunny day here. The ice cream van has just turned up outside. Clearly one of the neighbours' kids has just been told they can't have ice cream, and all I can hear behind me is screaming, which I'm sure is coming through to you as well. I listened to the playback as I edited the interview with Doug Conant from earlier in the week yesterday, and there's a lot of playtime outside during it. So the distractions that we're going to face throughout spring and summer, but it's a sign that the weather's good outside. I just wish it would rain just when I was recording the podcast and be sunny the rest of the time. But it is what it is while we're in lockdown, and probably beyond as well. Hopefully the screaming will stop soon and normality will resume. If you are joining us live on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on YouTube, say hello. We are broadcasting. I look at my clock, it's 5:30 on Thursday evening in the UK that we're broadcasting now. So if you're joining us live, it's Easter. Why are you still working? But you could be in the States, of course, when it's lunchtime. So it's the perfect lunch accompaniment, or wherever you are in the world. Say something in the comments. Come and join us. Tell us where you are. I'm delighted to join another friend from across the pond today. We seem to have a run of my American friends on the podcast at the moment, and I'm delighted that we have been. My guest today is Mark Beal. He is a professor of PR and marketing communications at Rutgers University in New Jersey. He's been a PR and marketing practitioner for over 25 years now, and he's worked on a range of global events like the Olympic Games, Rolling Stones tour. He's worked on the US Open tennis and a couple of strange events, the Super Bowl and the World Series, which I think are equated with those funny sports that Americans play that we don't understand over here. But clearly on big events, and a huge amount of experience there. As a marketing man, and one of the things we could have talked about was how you engage with sponsorship and with clients in those scenarios. But what really struck me when talking to Mark about this podcast, as a marketing man, one of the key areas of focus is how you talk to different customer groups. And one of the ones we've all got to get our head around, not just from a marketing and advertising perspective, but from a communications and relationships perspective. And if we don't get this right, I think it's going to lead to a lot of challenges in the workplace over the next few years, is Gen Z. And Mark is the author of 4 books, and the last 2 are all focused on Gen Z. Initially, I think 2018, Mark wrote Decoding Gen Z, and then in 2020, Engaging Gen Z. And that is our focus for our conversation today. How do we engage with the younger generation coming into the workforce now? So, Mark, thank you very much for joining me. Welcome to the Connected Leadership Podcast.
Andy, thank you very much for having me. This is great to join you across the pond and collaborate with you today on what I call the next most important generation for employers and for brands as well.
Absolutely. And I think, and this is something we are going to explore through our conversation, possibly one that's going to be harder to get our heads around. Those of us a bit more dyed in the wool, and perhaps, and this is what I want to ask you about, perhaps a bigger shift than we've experienced before. But let's start with the basics, because not everyone knows their generations and their bands, and it's easy to lose count as we go from Boomer, X, Y, Millennial, Z. Where are we? So, who are Gen Z?
Yeah. So, according to Pew Research, and I think they're a pretty good, reputable organization to base it on. They set the first year as 1997. So the first birth year for Generation Z is 1997. They won't set the last year, believe it or not, for another 10 years. So I say it's 97 to approximately 2012. It's a 15-year window, but within that window, those who just graduated university in the last year or 2 or 3 and are now at their first jobs, right? So they're entry-level employees, those who are in university, those who are in high school, those who are in elementary school, right on down to about 8 or 9 years old. So that's, at least as you said, just to set it up to understand who are they, what is the age range, and where are they kind of in their life stage.
And actually, you talk about people just leaving university and going in at entry level now. That also suggests that this isn't the start of Gen Z or Gen Z in the workforce. There are people who will have left school without further education who will have been in the workforce for 3 or 4 years by now.
That's right. The oldest Gen Zers, you're absolutely right. They've been in the workforce now for 2, 3, maybe 4 years. And to your point, they're going to continue arriving in the workforce for the next 15 or so years. So employers, recruiters, human resources, they all need to get a better understanding of what you said at the beginning. How do you effectively engage this generation, communicate with this generation? Because recruiting them is one thing, but then retaining them, as we know, is completely different. And I like to say all the time, if there aren't certain things you're doing within your corporation, your brand, your company, big or small, Gen Z, I believe, will leave as quickly as they arrive.
I touched on this in at the very beginning in the introduction, and I think this is the heart of what I want to understand from the podcast. My belief, my perspective, is that there has been a bigger jump between generations in terms of behavior and expectations, particularly in the workplace, than between any previous generation. So the change in attitudes and behavior between boomers and Gen X and going on between generations from there would have been more subtle. Certainly when I started work, I'm a Gen X, 1969. When I started work, there was an expectation of a job for life. That came from the boomer generation. That took a few years to disappear. And I think there are still people who still see jobs as a career you forge for life and stay with the company. But that's less frequent now. But from what I understand of Gen Z is that they're going to be building portfolio careers and jumping around as I did. I was never a job for lifer, but they're going to be jumping around like crazy. So how big is that shift in attitude and expectation between generations compared to what's gone before?
I think it's a major, major shift, to your point, on a couple of fronts. We'll start, as you said, with that comparison between kind of a career perhaps at one corporation compared to what we're looking at now. So I just completed my latest nationwide survey of Gen Zers here in the United States, and I gave them 5 personas to respond to them. Which did they feel they best were kind of related to? And the number one, by far, entrepreneur. They've got this incredible entrepreneurial spirit, incredible entrepreneurial mindset. So to your point, they kind of want to exercise that in a few ways. Yes, they may go traditionally to get a job when they graduate, but they also want to have an opportunity to work on that side project, maybe that startup company, maybe it's a nonprofit initiative, but they want to have an opportunity to do that. And so they're looking for an employer who's also giving them the chance to pursue that passion as well and not just be locked into, the job 24/7. So that's just one. There's a couple of other key points, and we're seeing it during this pandemic. I wrote a column a year ago. Over the next decade, Gen Z was going to expedite remote work and, working what we call WFA, working from anywhere. The pandemic actually brought it on very quickly.
Yeah.
But that's another thing too, is because of their affinity for technology, because of their lack of comfort, or excuse me, not their comfortability with technology, they can work from anywhere, anytime, any place. And so that's another area here too, where it's not like they don't feel necessarily like I have to report every single day to this office space. That's huge. I mean, like you, I'm Gen X, and I reported for more than 25 plus years to an office every day. And I was in there by 8:30 in the morning, and I was there until 6, 7, 8 o'clock at night. That's just the way it was. They don't think that way, right? That's not the mindset. They don't mind working. They love working. But the idea of commuting somewhere and spending, say, an hour to get there, they see that as inefficient. Like, I could be using that time to work, but also the idea that they could work from anywhere and deliver equal value or a greater value. So that's another area. And then real quickly on two other fronts, I recently, as I mentioned, surveyed Gen Zers. And what I asked was, what's the number one quality you're looking for in a future employer? Now, as you said, because we're both Xers, when I graduated from college back in '89, number one was salary, number two was salary, number three was salary, competitive salary. Not for this group. 34%. I'm looking for a corporate culture of diversity and inclusion where I can feel like I belong. Salary is at 26, 27%. So yes, it's a factor. It's not the number one factor. This is the most diverse and inclusive generation ever. And they're looking for that in the companies where they're going to work. They want to be part of a corporate culture of diversity, inclusion, and belonging.
That's really, really fascinating. And we've talked a lot about diversity and inclusion, and with a stress on inclusion, because we talk about diversity a lot, but maybe not inclusion enough. But we've covered that a few times on the podcast, but it's the first time I've heard a statistic like that people are actually looking. You hope people are, but that it's a compelling reason. I want to pick up on something, a way that you phrase that, and that is, what are you looking for in an employer? Because has there been a shift as well from employees being interviewed by employers to employees interviewing prospective employers and taking much more control of who they work for?
I believe there has been. I work every single day with those who are about to graduate and those who have graduated and helping them secure their next opportunity. And I've seen that, to your point. And one of the things we discuss is when you're going in for that interview, and today that interview may be via Zoom or some other platform, you should be interviewing this potential employer as much as they're interviewing you. Does their culture, is it the right culture for you? Does it feel like they're innovative enough for you? Does it feel like they're going to really care about your career? They're going to empower you, all those things. And so I stress that with the Gen Zers I help prepare for interviews. And I do believe that. I'm currently working with many because they're graduating, here in May, another month, the next class will be graduating. And I get that from many of them. They're not just settling for a job. They are looking for the right place to, the right culture, the right place to work, the right place where they feel they can truly be empowered. And so I agree with you completely. I think that has been a shift as well. Very few, if any, are saying, I just need a job. I don't hear that at all anymore. Or even maybe 6, 7, 8 years ago, I was hearing that. I'm not hearing that at all anymore.
And how is that impacting the way that Gen Z engage with authority figures? And with that in mind, how does that impact how leaders need to engage with Gen Z from the very outset when they are recruiting?
Absolutely. A couple of key points here. And again, this comes through the research, both the quantitative and the qualitative. Couple of points. One, Gen Z will tell me often, I would love to go work where I'm working and collaborating with a mentor, not a manager. It's a slight nuance, but in other words, instead of the traditional, I hate to use the word boss, who's the taskmaster telling me what to do, I'd rather be in a much more collaborative relationship, understanding why we're doing this. I'll do any task you want, but I want to be part of the process and understand. So I want to be more in that mentor kind of role as opposed to just the typical manager. And then the second part, and I think this comes out of again, 2020. I think this comes out of the Black Lives Matter awakening. I think this comes out of the other thing that I call this generation is the purpose generation. And so the other factor they're looking for are to work for companies, again, big and small, but that have a purpose more than just profits. Are we doing good things for the community, for society? Are we contributing to causes? Are we taking purposeful actions and not just writing a check and making donations? That has always been the case with this generation over the last couple of years. But as we come out of 2020, even more so, I want to work for a company, big or small, that demonstrates purpose, and that, again, a purposeful purpose and purposeful actions and contributing to just a better world, a better society, a better community.
So how as a leader, do you embed that into your company and convince this generation? What I'm thinking of here, I think it's a fantastically positive thing the young generation coming into the workplace are going to really force a shift in the way that companies engage with what's previously been maybe to a large degree for some a tick box exercise, the CSR, the corporate social responsibility.
Right.
But where's the balance? Because one of the things that I hear complained about the most at the moment, and I'm liberal with a small L, is the woke culture, and that's associated with this generation very much. Is there going to be a clash of culture with overt wokeness, too much wokeness coming in, and businesses unable to adapt to it? And is this generation able to meet in the middle?
Great question and great observation. Over the winter, so over December and January, I taught a graduate course at Rutgers that was called Purposeful Public Relations During This Time of the Pandemic and Black Lives Matter Awakening. And the theme that came through week in and week out was authenticity. And it came down to not just brands marketing, but also employers. And so to your point, for the leaders of those organizations, it's not just what you say, it's not just what you put out in a statement or a news release, but are you truly backing that up with authentic action that's authentic and genuine, and again, not just as sometimes we call it, they'll call it purpose washing, where it's just a facade, but is it truly authentic? And I think definitely in 2020, organizations of all types, but especially within marketing and advertising, especially agencies, just because I follow them closely, they really took a close look at themselves and said, we do need to make some changes here. We are not diverse enough. We are not diverse up the top. We're not diverse throughout the organization. We maybe aren't as purposeful as we should be. And so it goes back to the idea of, okay, those changes are very good. Transforming and innovating is always great, but they do need to be authentic and not just, again, for lack of a better word, cutting a check and saying, we've done our job. We made a donation, as you said, to a charity or an organization. It's got to be authentic through and through, day in and day out, consistently. And that's what this generation is looking for as well.
But is the generation able to meet in the middle? Because this is the concern I have as someone who said I'm liberal, so I identify with a lot of the issues and a lot of the progress that they're making, but a lot of it scares me because you see extremes. You've got an extreme of people having to have a whiter than white past, organizations having to be whiter than white, and everything is seen without nuance. That seems to be increasingly a challenge. How do you get Gen Z to meet you in the middle? Because that seems to be a big challenge at the moment.
I think part of it, again, we'll just say for now, from an employer-employee standpoint, right, just for that part. I think part of it is just, again, do they at least have a voice within the organization of some sort, right? So as opposed to going to work and just feeling like a cog in the machine, which I don't think anyone wants to feel that way, but for many, many years, many people were, right? Do they have a voice? When I present, and I present often, usually once or twice a week to major corporations, and sometimes it's specifically to the human resources and the recruiting folks, I always throw out the idea, I don't know if any of them have taken up on it, but I always throw out the idea of, I would create a group that's called your ZEOs. Your ZEOs. Take all your young recent graduates and create this kind of group within your organization where you're giving them the chance to at least have a platform to propose ideas, propose suggestions. And those suggestions would be around new technologies, new innovations, all those kinds of things. But at least if they're in a corporate culture like that, or at least they feel like they've got a voice and then someone's listening, they're not, they don't expect everything they suggest that action's going to be taken. But I think if they feel like they've got a platform of some sort, and at least people are listening to our ideas and considering them, I think that's at least meeting a little bit halfway in the middle, right? As opposed to, I work at this organization, I really don't have any voice at all. I feel like I've got some good ideas, but I really don't have a place to contribute. And so I always suggest this ZEO group, which I know someone's going to take me up on it one day. But it's just the idea of kind of a community within the corporation where these young executives have an opportunity to collaborate, connect, aside from their day-to-day work, and suggest and propose perhaps ideas. It could be cultural ideas, it could be technology, it could be anything.
It's a great idea. It wouldn't work in the UK purely because it would be ZEO. So you'd lose the play on words there. But I interviewed Doug Conant recently for the podcast, who's the former president of Nabisco Foods and of the Campbell Soup Company. And one of the key things he talked about was the importance of making people feel heard, listened to. And he said that if you listen to people, they will then listen to you. So this sounds like good business practice, good leadership practice, whatever generation that you're dealing with anyway.
Well, I'm hearing that to your point. I'm hearing that across major corporations now they're hosting many more, for lack of a better word, town halls where it's not just the CEO standing up and reporting on, the state of the corporation, but it's actually the town hall where the employees and others can voice, suggest, propose, recommend. So there's a forum, a public forum and other forums to do that, where maybe 10 years ago, 5 years ago, those didn't exist as much.
So that shift will probably be driven even more as this generation comes into the workforce and really has their voice and uses it. Just take a quick break for a second. For anyone who's watching live, please do let us know you're out there. If you're on Facebook, YouTube or LinkedIn, say hello in the comments, post any questions. This is 10 to 6 on Thursday. I'm saying that because I've noticed a few people watching it back and thinking it's live and commenting at the time. Please feel free to do so, because I do see those comments as well. So we've talked about, I talked about woke culture. If I'd have said the word woke 5 years ago, you wouldn't have known what I was talking about, other than the past tense of waking up. So language changes with generations, is my point, and that's one example. Every generation has developed their own shorthand, their own slang, their own references. Does Gen Z differ in any way to previous generations in the use of that shorthand and the impact it's having on relationships with people from other generations?
Not different in that they do have their own language and lexicon. In fact, in both of my books, Decoding Gen Z and Engaging Gen Z, I was conducting one-on-one interviews right from the get-go. They were using their language, and I had to say, stop, define that. What does that mean? And then I would start every interview after that with, give me a couple of new terms. And all of a sudden I had what I call a glossary or a dictionary. And on the front first section of each of those books is an extensive glossary and dictionary of Gen Z terms and terminology. And so I'd say the only thing that's different, and not every term or terminology, but many of the terms tied directly to their preferred social media channels. So things like Instagrammable. And again, some of these terms are used now by even you and I as Xers, but Instagrammable, right? The idea of give me an experience, give me something I can immerse myself and then create content and share that content, whatever that experience could be, a sports experience, a music experience, whatever it might be, but Instagrammable probably wasn't a word 5 years ago. There's others, I always say, peep my tweet, that's like, if I tweet something, you gotta like it because peep my tweet, or drop a pin. Again, things that other generations might use, but this is my location. This is where I'm at. Those kinds of things. We always hear, at least here in the United States, slide into my DM. In other words, direct message me. I want, that's one way to get to people if you don't have access to an email or a phone, but maybe through Instagram or something else, you slide into their DM. So a lot of the terms and terminology actually are coming or emerging from their preferred social media channels, which when I present, and the research backs it up, I talk about the big four. And the big four, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube as a platform, and Snapchat. Those are the big four. They go beyond those four, but those are the big four right now, with Instagram still number one, according to my latest research, which just was fielded a week ago. TikTok closing quickly and expanding quickly. In the past year alone, since the pandemic started, I asked this question. Close to 70% of Gen Z either started on TikTok or became very active on TikTok only in the past 12 months. So that's a platform that continues to grow day in and day out. But yeah, the language and lexicon, a lot of it ties back to, again, the channels they prefer, the media channels and social media channels they prefer. But like other generations, they've just got their own way of speaking, and again, language and lexicon.
So what are the implications for the, it seems strange saying this, but the traditional social media platforms, I don't know if you can be traditional when it's social media, but the Facebooks and LinkedIn of this world, are they going to gravitate towards those as they, certainly LinkedIn, as they engage in the workforce, or are they just seen as old hat and you don't see them engaging with them at all? Are they going to lose their place at the top?
For now, Facebook, and when we say Facebook, we mean Facebook, not Instagram, which is owned by Facebook, yeah. Right? Because I just mentioned Instagram is number one. But Facebook, they still consider that's kind of mom, dad, grandma, grandpa. If they're on there, I don't necessarily need to be on there. Maybe once in a while I'll post a photo just so they know I'm safe here at college, or I'm safe wherever I'm living. LinkedIn, though, and you've probably seen this too, in the last few years, to me, it's become much more of a content sharing, more of a community. I felt like when LinkedIn, again, when I first got on LinkedIn many years ago, it was really just, I just met you at a conference, you just met me, let's connect. And that was about it. It was very, for lack of a better word, one-dimensional, right? I feel like now it's become a real content sharing platform, a thought leadership platform. And I will say that as the Gen Zers get into sophomore, junior, senior year of university, and then, of course, when they graduate, they are very active on LinkedIn. They see it as a place for professional development, expanding their network, thought leadership, content sharing, all those things. So I don't see that one slowing down or going away, because I think LinkedIn has evolved as a platform, again, as opposed to just being let's connect and never talk again, which I think is what happened for years. It's really become, I think, a thought leadership content sharing platform. And I think Gen Z feels like they can share content, but they can also learn a lot. And of course, it's serving as a platform to identify potential jobs and other opportunities there. But I'm seeing, again, at that, sophomore, junior, senior, first, second year out of school and beyond, very active on LinkedIn. If I post something, or later today when I post about my interview with you, Andy, I will have responses immediately from Gen Zers, immediately. And those are, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24-year-olds who will say, I watched, or I'm going to watch, or this was great. So I think that's a platform where they're highly engaged.
And certainly over the years, I've always got a handful of connection requests from Gen Zers, in school, in college, in uni. And I've spoken at schools and unis, but it's not something I do a lot. But they're finding my content. So that's clear. And, the fact you talked about it being a content site, of course, this is being streamed live on LinkedIn. So it's interesting how that has created the platform that Gen Zers can engage in. What about social audio? We've seen the rise of Clubhouse, which I've talked about on the podcast a few times. I'm still not a complete convert. But Clubhouse has come up. We've got Instagram and Twitter have got their versions. I saw yesterday, so we're recording this on April the 1st, so I know it wasn't an April Fool. It was just a few hours before, maybe in Australia it was. LinkedIn are looking at a social audio version as well, which baffles me, to be honest. Are the younger generation engaging in social audio, or is it too one of my criticisms is, whereas with other social media you can go in, you can make an interaction, and then you can pull out again, on social audio you're there for an hour for a longer conversation. Does that put Gen Z off?
Yeah. So to your point, I made sure I asked about Clubhouse in the latest survey, because to your point, it's each day increasing. More people are talking about it. So as of last week, 20% of Gen Zers in the United States, and I surveyed those between 13 and 24, said, yes, I am on Clubhouse. So 20% already are on Clubhouse. And then I said, well, what are you doing on Clubhouse? And a lot of it was things like professional development, learning, networking, connecting, all those things. So they are seeing value in it. And I'm hearing it almost every day when I'm on the phone or having a conversation with a university student who either is on it or saying, I want to be on it or I want to get on it. So it's definitely making its way. I think to your point about audio, and to your point, I think just yesterday too, Spotify announced they just purchased a company to compete against Clubhouse. Now, Spotify is a very, very popular brand with Gen Z. That's a brand they love, Spotify, because they believe they get great value. They're able to download a lot of content at a very low cost. But I also asked just about audio in general, because they over-index on YouTube. So from a video standpoint, we know they consume video. And nearly 50% say that they do download podcasts. And then I ask why. And they say, because it fits our lifestyle. We can download it and listen anytime, anywhere, whether it's on the train, on the bus, at the gym, working out, running, whatever it might be. It fits my lifestyle that I can listen to that. And the second thing they'll say is the variety of content also fits my lifestyle. So if I really love music or comedy or politics or business, I can find content for me on podcasts. So yeah, audio seems to be a powerful medium and a powerful channel for this generation. And they claim again, and I think the Clubhouse number will go up because I think we're still very early in the Clubhouse life stage. So the fact that 20%, I don't want to say I was surprised, but I thought that was a pretty significant number, 20% already saying they are active on Clubhouse.
I want to come back to that because there's something else about that I want that sort of sparks a question in my mind I want to pick up on. But we've got a comment from my friend Steve Sutherland, and Steve said, fascinating conversation. The point made about making young people feel listened to is very important, but it sometimes seems to me, and I'm a child of the mid-50s, that being listened to isn't enough. Immediate change is demanded, as evidenced by what has become known as the cancel culture. And I think what Steve's point echoes there is my question about wokeness, and yeah, cancel culture is probably the better phrase to use for the point I wanted to make. So is being listened to enough, I guess, picking up on Steve's point, and then I'll come back to my question about Clubhouse.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question, Steve. I don't think being listened to is enough. I think it's a piece to the puzzle. I think they would love to see a little bit of some action come out of the listening. So again, this is not the best example, but if our CEOs, propose 10 ways to improve or evolve or transform the company they work at, well, it'd be great at least if action maybe was taken on one of those things, right, or two of those things. So I think the listening is part one, but then seeing some action, and that even comes down to, when I meet with Gen Z and we talk about, again, this is more from a marketing perspective, but companies that truly demonstrate purpose and are purposeful. And the distinction they'll make is exactly that. They'll be, again, donating, cutting a check, making a statement are all, have purpose. But all of a sudden, when they see a company that is action oriented with that same, they've now created a program maybe for first gen university students, or maybe they've created a program, it seems to take it one more level, because again, as it's an action as opposed to a statement or a donation. But that action oriented it resonates quite a bit with them.
And one of the things Steve said is immediate action, immediate change, and that goes to my question about satisfying Gen Z with meeting in the middle a little bit as well. So back to the question that sprang to mind about the social audio. Because one of my experiences when I work with younger people is that they're not necessarily, and I think this is probably the same across all generations, and we would have been the same, they're not necessarily confident engaging in conversation with older people, more people perceived as more senior. I know plenty of young people who are and are quite happy to jump in, but as a generalization, there is that challenge of talking to people more senior. Are they going onto social audio to listen rather than actually join the conversation, or do you think that there's confidence enough to go and jump in and take the stage, take the platform?
I think initially, to your point, it's listening, it's getting comfortable just with the platform and the communities on Clubhouse and understanding how does this work and work. It would be the same as, and I think you draw a great connection. It'd be the same, and I just gave this advice yesterday to one of my students who's starting a new job on Monday. And I said, even though we're virtual still and we're remote, you're going to have a lot of meetings on Zoom. In the first meeting or two or three, don't all of a sudden, speak out like you know everything. But as you get comfortable with the group you're working with, as you get comfortable with the company, 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks in, they do want to hear from you. They're not inviting you to meetings to just sit there and listen. They want you to participate. They want to get your input. So, it's fine as you get settled in to listen, because you want to first just understand the dynamic, the chemistry, how the culture of the organization. But eventually, you want to be an active participant. And if you're not, eventually you may not get invited back to those meetings anymore, because they're going to say, well, that new person we hired, it's nice they attend, but they don't really contribute anything, right? They don't say anything. So I think that's really, really, really important. Kind of goes back to a point that you talked about. And I wish I could take credit for this quote, but I can't. But it's the CMO of MTV. And the quote she gave about a year ago was, Generation Z is the first generation that learned to swipe before they could wipe. And the idea there is that they've had technology in their hands since age 1, 2, 3, and 4, and they're very comfortable with technology. They're very comfortable with an iPad or a phone in their hands. But to your point, sometimes you need to actually look up, and you need to look eye to eye and have a conversation. And I do see a distinction, as you say. There's some that do it incredibly well, and maybe they just have practiced that. But I do see a distinction between some Gen Zers who are masterful at the one-on-one conversation, or the conversation with a group of 2 or 3 or 4, and I see on the other end of the spectrum those who whatever you want to call it, nervous about having the conversation, hesitant, because I think they've done more of their communication, via text and via email and via the phone, and it hasn't had to be kind of face to face. So that is something where I think a candidate for sure. There's certain candidates, certain students who I know when they go into the interview, I kind of tell them, be yourself, because they're already confident, and they can have that conversation one-to-one. And I just know they're going to go in there and impress that potential employer, because they've kind of mastered the art of the conversation.
When I wrote my last book, Just Ask, I interviewed my niece, because I wanted to get the perspective. The book's about vulnerability, and I wanted to get the perspective on vulnerability from her generation. She's 22 now, I think. She would have been 21 when I interviewed her for that, and she was a first-year undergraduate, and it wasn't just pure nepotism and laziness. She and her colleagues at university were working on a project looking at whether hers was the loneliest generation. And one of the things that really struck me that she said to me was that many of her acquaintances, her friends, had forgotten how to talk face to face. And she said that it's when you talk in person, you can't take words back. You can't backspace. And it's so much easier digitally to use emojis to express yourself than sometimes finding the right words. Does this generation struggle, and you've just touched on it, with face-to-face conversation? How much has this digital diet that they've been on since they were toddlers impacted on their ability to communicate, particularly with people older than them? And so I hate stacking questions, but this sort of all fits together. For those of us who are older generations, rather than telling them to put the phone down, is that what we should be doing, or should we be learning to adapt and embrace their preferred style of communication?
I'll go in reverse order on that. Yeah. One thing about that phone, and I don't mean when, and again, you and I are experts, so we can say this. I don't mean when you and I are with a Gen Z, and if we're trying to have a conversation and they're just staring at the phone and they're not even looking at us, but we do need to understand that phone is the epicenter of how they conduct business. They start companies, they socialize, they work. So the phone is not just, I'm playing video games, or I'm, as you said, sending emojis to somebody. They truly conduct business and work and school and life on the phone. But to your point, there are times where the phone needs to be put to the side or put in the pocket, especially when you're in a conversation face to face, or again, with 2 or 3 colleagues. You don't want to be in we'll just say in a corporate setting or an office setting or a job setting where you're having a conversation about whatever it might be, work, corporate culture, and the Gen Z is over there but staring at the phone while the other 3 are talking. So it is something they need to, for lack of a better word, learn, understand, evolve, and recognize there's incredible value in face-to-face conversation, eye-to-eye conversation. And I think that's why I'm a big proponent and have always been. And I know, again, during the pandemic, it's changed a little bit, but the more internship experience, the more experience you can get in any sort of office setting, corporate setting, small business, big business, nonprofit, you're just going to be around people that are different generations. You're going to be around people who are at different levels. And you're going to be outside of your maybe traditional, group of friends who you may spend more time with. So I think all those experiences, and typically when those university students come back after the spring or summer or fall from internship, and they like, that was an incredible experience. I feel like I grew so much during that experience. I learned so much during that experience. For most of them, it's the first time they've ever had again, I'll call it an internship in a professional setting, aside from part-time jobs they may have had when they were younger. It's the first time they're, in a professional setting. And so I think hopefully they quickly learn that, as you said, there's certain times that phone is useful and valuable, but there's other times where, put it aside or actually leave it at your desk when you go to a face-to-face meeting. So it's interesting, and it's something we're going to have to, continue to monitor, because again, face-to-face conversations, face-to-face meetings, I even say this to them, verbally presenting, and verbal presentations can be a job interview one-on-one, or it can be presenting to 1,000 people. It's never going away. It's never going to go away. And as a student, or even as someone at our age, we can always improve, always evolve, right? I always say you can never perfect the way you verbally present, but you can always tweak it, improve it, evolve it, all those things. And I think that's a lesson I tell them all as they go off into internships in the workforce. You can always improve the way you verbally present one-on-one, in a small group, or in a larger setting.
And that goes for all of us, doesn't it?
Absolutely goes for all of us.
Yeah. And I think we're going to have to meet in the middle here on this. That we have to, as the older generations, we have to recognise, as you said, that when a Gen Zer is immersed in their phone, it doesn't mean they're not paying attention. They have a different way of paying attention. As a speaker, we had to learn that when someone was on the phone when we spoke, they could well have been taking notes. Or watching a video of us speaking about something else, or whatever it might be. That's the modern world, and I know it took some longer to adapt to that than others. So let's finish off with where we are now. We've just come through, well, we haven't come through, we are going through probably a unique experience in all of our lives, every generation. Many people argue it has impacted Gen Z more than any other generation. It's affected those at school who have lost a year or more of their schooling. It has affected those in their first jobs. Both, my older niece springs to mind there. My younger niece is still at university, lost the chance to come to America for a year and study at San Francisco. So they've been impacted hugely. And those in their first jobs have lost that opportunity to learn to engage with work colleagues from the off, in person. How's this going to impact them going forward? And is this something that is just going to reset itself in a year or two? Or is this going to change the way we interact with each other even more so going forward?
I begin every keynote presentation with my first or second slide, and I let the audience know, whether it's HR or whether it's marketers, this pandemic has happened during Gen Z's most formative years. All of us, as you said, Andy, have been affected. All of us, no matter what age you are. But for Gen Z, as you said, there are so many milestones you experience at 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. Those are major growth years, major development years. Not that we don't have milestones at our age, of course we do. But as you said, first internship, study abroad, first job out of college, right? A lot of that went away or was delayed. A lot of it actually went away or was delayed or was completely transformed to where those internships were canceled, right? You lost the internship. Now all of a sudden your resume is not going to look what you thought it was going to look like, or it became a remote experience. I'm right now here in March, a year after this pandemic began, at least in the United States, now graduates of May 2020 are now just getting their first jobs. I've had a number of students, close to 24 in the last, since January 1, have just secured their first job. Well, that's not the normal cycle either. We know that. If you graduate in May, you either might have a job when you graduate, or you in June, July, August. So it's going to have a lasting effect, a lasting impact. I will tell you this. What I always say to me is Gen Z is incredibly resilient. And I see that firsthand. I really do. They are resilient. They're resilient during these times. They will be bounced back. They will become innovative. I lost my internship. That's all right. I'm going to figure a way to do something virtual or remote. So that's one. The second thing which came up, and I think it does tie to this as well, it came up in my survey just last week. I looked at a few areas. I said, what's most important to you? And it was included things like mental health, physical health, professional development. And by and far and away, it was mental health. That was like their biggest concern, where they, and I can understand that, because again, coming through this pandemic, I have many students who say, I'm really concerned. My resume is not going to look anything like it should. It's not going to look like anything of class of 17 and 18 and 19. And am I going to graduate and not get a job? So there's that anxiety is building up as well. But we can't underestimate their resilience. They are, and you know this from your niece. They are truly, truly, truly resilient. But they're looking for help. They're looking for collaboration. They're looking for support. And that's why I do things like just try to leverage my network as much as possible, because I know they've had their internships and their jobs have been put on hold or canceled altogether, and they need other opportunities. So it will have a lasting impact.
Mark, just briefly for anyone who's watching live, we're going to go on and record our second podcast, which is 3 questions about Mark's career and the role of relationships within them. So do stick with us and post any comments or questions. Steve, thank you for yours. It was a really fascinating one. Just for the podcast recording at the moment, I'm just going to say, Mark, this has been really fascinating. Exactly what I expected. I knew it would be a key subject people would be engaged by. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so that's now you're getting the behind the scenes stuff that we do on the recording.
Now, is this next one, the next one's not live?
Yeah, it's still live. So if anyone's watching, they can stick with us. It's just that they go out at on different days. So it's just getting a clean edit for the podcast. Because every time I go in and edit, I realise it sounds weird when I'm talking to the people live and not to the people on the podcast. So it's just nice to get that break in. So this one will be a little bit shorter. About 15 minutes. We're looking for so the focus is going to be on the role of relationships in your career and some resources that you've recommended or you would recommend. Hopefully people are still watching. Please do comment. We always appreciate that. But we'll start off, Mark, with a question I always ask. In what ways have professional relationships played a positive role in your career? And feel free, if you'd like, to name people that have had that impact on you.
Sounds good.
So, yeah, over to you on that.
I'll
just edit in from your answer.
Oh, okay. All right, so I'm going to go with it. Okay. When I was at university, and I also attended Rutgers University, and again, I'm a Gen Xer, so I graduated in 1989. I was very into journalism. Journalism was my major, and my focus, at least for the first few years, was writing, broadcasting, all those things. And it wasn't until between my junior and senior year that I had an opportunity to intern with a public relations agency in New York. Now, what's interesting about that is, of course, being a young college student, I had already secured an internship with NBC, which I thought, wow, this is great. I'm going to work at NBC, specifically WNBC, which doesn't exist anymore, but was a very powerful radio station. That's where Howard Stern worked during the morning, and we actually had the night show. We were one of the first major market sports radio shows, and I was just the intern. I was the intern, assistant producer, right? So when I knew I had that internship, I said, oh, this is going to be great. I'm going to go into the city every day, and I'm going to get there at 5 o'clock and work till midnight and come back. Great. And my father came to me and he said, well, I know someone who leads and runs a public relations agency. Why don't you intern there as well? And of course, being a 20-something, I'm like, 2 internships? Why would I ever do that? Work all day and then work all night? 5 days a week? What? Luckily, I didn't listen to myself, and I listened to my father. So he, through relationships, as you say, and I think it always does come down to relationships. And that's why I always say never burn a bridge with anybody. He reached out or made a call or whatever he did. And he said, there's a chance for you to intern with this public relations agency, which, by the way, had a focus on sports. And again, my first reaction was, why would I do that? I already have an internship. But better, I guess I somehow thought it through and realized he knows better than I. And I went to that public relations agency in the summer of 1988 called Mike Cohen Communications. Mike Cohen came from NBC Sports. And it was a small shop. I think there was 3 or 4 other people. Walked in that first day, and by the time I left, 8 hours later, I said, this is actually what I want to do. I don't necessarily want to report on the news. I want to uncover incredible stories and share them with media, whether those stories are in sports or entertainment or somewhere else. So I left there that day after just one day, and I said, actually, it was like a light bulb. This is what I want to do. Well, here's what's interesting is 2 of the people at that agency, when I was, again, just between junior and senior year, Tony Signori and Brian Harris, who were also very young, but they were full-time. Well, fast forward, I graduate college a year plus later, and they reach out and say, oh, by the way, we're now with another agency. Would you like to join us? Well, that led to the past 30 years of collaborating with them together with another partner, John Liparis. We've worked at an agency, Taylor in New York. And while I'm not active there anymore, throughout the 90s, throughout the 2000s, throughout the 2010s, we were side by side and still obviously maintain contact and speak and all that. But if I didn't take advantage of that one internship with that small agency in 1988, none of that would have happened. It changed the entire trajectory of my life and my career. So my message to my students, well, to all students, you never know where that door may open or that relationship may lead. And when I tell them all the time, and I think they laugh a little bit when I say it, but it could be your neighbor, it could be your uncle, it could be someone you don't even know yet, but they could lead you to that next opportunity or the next opportunity. So I just tell them that they should have their eyes and ears open all the time, whether it's a social event, a networking event, a guest lecturer in the university, an internship, sitting at a coffee shop. You never know who that person is or where they could potentially connect you. And I always say when you're actively seeking a job, whether you're a university graduate or someone who's been in the business for 10, 15 years and you're in between jobs, it's about, I always say, who knows who knows who knows who, because that is kind of the connection to potentially that next opportunity in your career.
Yeah. I mean, when I look back at my career, when I worked for people in my 20s, all bar one of those came from introductions. And, I wanted to work in the music industry when I left university. And my first job came from a friend of my uncle's. You mentioned your uncle. It was a friend of my uncle's that I'd never met. So it really goes to the point. And you said that you're making, when we had our Monday interview, you said you're making your network open to the kids on your course now. And that's so powerful for them. I remember a few years ago there was an article in the London Evening Standard. There was a, not scandal, but there was an outcry at the time about nepotism and how internships were going to the children of very privileged, government ministers' kids and so forth. And there was an article in the Standard about the importance of, why we should ban nepotism. And my response was, no, you can't. You just can't ban nepotism. What you can do is you can empower and educate people so that they can create the same opportunities for themselves, whatever their background, by building a network. And obviously you're doing that for the students that you're working with now.
Yeah, I actually, to your point, I do tell my students all the time, and I say this all the time, I don't actually get anybody jobs or internships. They do it. Yeah. I just try to help open a door. But ultimately, to your point, they still have to conduct the interview. They still have to conduct those face-to-face conversations that we've discussed. They still have to be able to walk into that company and maybe have 3 or 4 or 5 rounds of interviews. But if at this point in my career, I can leverage my professional network just to give someone a chance to get a foot in the door to get interviewed, just to get interviewed, they're still competing with many, many other students from many universities for that one job or 2 jobs. So you're absolutely right. I'm just a big believer in professional networking, and again, it just goes to the idea of, it's why I'm always a big believer in just always helping others, and never looking for something in return, because it's a way to build relationships, and it's a way that, when you do have a student who you truly want to help, and maybe that student doesn't have the relationships and didn't come up in community or area where they even know folks in advertising or marketing. I mean, that's a role I can help play, because I can build those bridges for them.
There's quotes that regular listeners to the podcast will have heard me share more than once, and anyone who's been on my training or my talks, I share it all the time. My favourite quote, but I have to share it with you because I think you'll enjoy it. It's a lady called Elizabeth Asquith Bibesco, who was the daughter of the former British Prime Minister Lord Asquith, poet and author. She said, "Blessed are they who give without remembering and receive without forgetting." And that's very much the attitude you just outlined.
Yes. I love it. And I think for me, I like to say, I've been 30 years into my career. And so at this point, it's my time to pay it back or pay it forward, either way you want to say it. I mean, that's kind of my responsibility at this point in my career.
Right, we're gonna, on such a positive note, I'm not gonna go into the challenges that you've had. I'm gonna go straight to the resources that you want to share. So, as an academic, I'm sure that there's a lot of books that you've read that have really jumped out at you. But we look at books, podcasts, TED Talks, other talks, any resources that have really made an impact on your career, you feel that people should dig out and get to understand. What would be the standout ones for you?
Well, I think I was going to say I might be unusual, but maybe I'm not. I'm just on a daily basis, I have must reads every day that starting at about 6 a.m. I must read. And I'm not going to tell you all 24 of them. But to me, and I bring this into the classroom, I call it real-time, real world. And it could be real-time, real world marketing, real-time, real world news. But I think it's really important for students and all of us just to be aware of what's happening. So many of my courses tie into public relations, marketing, and advertising. So every morning without fail at 8:40, I read, there's a leading research company called Morning Consult. And they come out at 8:40 every morning with basically, it captures everything that's happened in the greater world of marketing, advertising, public relations, brand building, all those kinds of things. And by reading that every day, I feel like I'm fully up to speed on what's happening with corporations, what's happening in social media, what's happening in sponsorships, what's happening in sports, who's dealing with a crisis today, all those things. So I'm a big believer in every single day. Reading a wide variety. I'll for lack of better, we'll call them newsletters, but and I subscribe to probably close to 24, and I read about 24 every day, and they range from sports to entertainment to marketing to advertising. So that's where I'm consuming a lot of my content. I did launch my own podcast 2 years ago because I was so inspired by others who had podcasts. I just love the long form storytelling. I feel like in a radio interview, especially a TV interview, but even a radio interview, unless maybe it's someone like Howard Stern, you never get deep into that person as far as their background and what makes them and what the journey, And so I love podcasts for that reason, and all types of podcasts hosted by a wide variety of folks, because it tends to be a 30, 35, 45 minute where you uncover so many things about that person. There's many podcasts I've listened to where I maybe barely knew the musician, the athlete, the artist, the actor, the author, the expert. And then after listening, you kind of understand, okay, now I understand the journey they were on, the road they were on, the career they were on. From a TEDx perspective, I love TEDx. And typically what I do is I'll just go into like YouTube and I'll just type in a subject and I'll just type in like TEDx, and this isn't the right one, but TEDx marketing, TEDx public relations, TEDx Gen Z. Is there anyone out there, right now? And I just did this recently. And then it's funny because once you do it, it's kind of hard to step away from the monitor, because after you watch one, it'll lead, of course, to another one. But I'm always impressed. I don't think I've ever watched a TEDx video that I've never walked away in some way inspired, informed, energized. I like every time I've watched them, I feel that way. So that to me is great content as well.
But have you got
so that's
any,
a little bit of a
have you got any that jump out? Because what we're looking to do is actually give people specific recommendations. You need to watch this. You need to read that. You need to listen to the other.
It's funny. I'm turning back in my bookcase here for other things. There's so many. I mean, I consume content extensively, all day, every day. For example, and this may not answer your question here, but I'm going to grab it if you don't mind. I literally put it right here because this month's issue of Fast Company, world's most innovative companies. I read through this and got done. And I'm like, wow. There are so many companies, so many brands doing so many innovative things that I said, this is not going to go in the garbage. This is going to actually sit on the corner of my desk because I want to every day see this looking back at me because I need to, and you and I are the same way, always innovate. How can I continue to innovate? Even if it's baby steps, that's fine. So it's even things like this. And in fact, I know some people may think I'm old school. I actually read every month the hard copy of Fast Company. I think this is one of the best outlets out there as far as innovation, evolution, all those things. And so I still subscribe and still get the actual hard copy. And I love when this shows up in the mail. Like when I was a kid, I used to get Sports Illustrated. And I love that. This is what I love now, reading Fast Company every month. And of course I read it online too. So it's those kind of sources that, again, I think the best way I can say it is inspire and innovate, new thinking, diversity of thought, all those kinds of things. And that's at least what I always look for in the content that I consume, whether, again, a podcast, a speech, a magazine, a book, or anything else.
That's great. I mean, you say it might not be what I'm looking for. It's exactly what I'm looking for because we get books that, for the right reasons, come up time and again. I love it when something different comes up. We had one of our guests who talked about the hip hop lyrics that inspire her, and obviously you're talking about a magazine. The question is really designed to just inspire listeners to find growth from wherever they can. I must ask you on this point. You said that you started a podcast. What happened?
Oh, it's still around. I shouldn't say that. It's transformed a little bit. So, again, always looking to do something maybe new and different. The podcast came out of my first book I ever authored, was called 101 Lessons I Never Taught You in College. And that book was the result of students saying, how do I conduct a job interview? How do I get a job? How do I network? Right? They had all these questions. And I thought, okay, I'm going to write a book that answers these 101. Ultimately, it became 101. And out of that, I thought, wow, I would love to create a podcast where I'm interviewing all types of leaders, someone who started a small business, someone who's a CEO, and just understand the lessons along their journey, who inspired them, who was their mentor, all those kinds of things. So I've got maybe not 100 episodes that are published and on the site and there, but now that I've really immersed myself in Gen Z, I've transitioned a little bit, and I just finished recording, and the first episodes will go up in about a week, a series called Gen Z from A to Z on YouTube. And these are very short 2 to 3 minute segments with Gen Zers. The first one I'll tell you is a 16-year-old CEO of a marketing agency. He's a high school junior, 16 years old. Yeah. Fascinating. I talked to him for an hour plus, but we're going to turn that into 2 to 3 minutes. And the audience for this is really you and I, right? It's not Gen Zers. Someone said to me, well, Gen Zers aren't going to watch that for 2 or 3 minutes. I said, this is not for Gen Z. It's for all the executives, the HR, the recruiters, the marketers who are trying to engage Gen Z. And so we just finished our first 4 guests separately. Each was about an hour-long conversation. And those episodes will start being posted or published on a YouTube site in basically the second week of April. And so that's kind of my focus now. And I just thought it made sense to maybe do something in the YouTube area. And again, I mentioned, Gen Z over indexes on YouTube. And I just thought that could be another channel that currently I'm not on YouTube. And I thought it could be just a new channel.
Do you know what the title of the channel is going to be so people can find it?
It is that. It's actually the actual formal title. I think it's called Mark Beal's Gen Z : From A to Z.
Great.
And so that channel's actually up there with my TEDx talk is on there.
And the podcast title
The podcast is called 101 Lessons in Leadership. I'm trying to think of the URL. It's definitely 101 Lessons, but I think it's 101 Lessons in Leadership.
So look for Mark Beal without an E, 101 Lessons in Leadership. Mark, thank you so much for joining me. Both conversations have been really enlightening. I say fascinating too much, and I keep thinking another word for fascinating. If anyone's picked that up, I know I do it. Just send me send me synonyms for fascinating, because I keep saying it. I'm going to use enlightening today. I've really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you so much for joining me. And if you've been listening or viewing live, thank you so much for joining us and sticking with us as well. I know you're there. I can see my viewing numbers in the top of the screen. You're being very quiet, but that's fine. You're just listening and lapping it up. Do post a comment on whichever channel you're enjoying this on. And if you can help out and share the content to your network, if you can go to the podcast on iTunes or Spotify and give a rating and a review, it really does help me get this found. I've noticed over recent weeks that there seems to be more traction with the podcast. We've been going for 7 months now, I think. We're up to about episode 75, around there, and people are talking to me about it, which is great, but we can get it. I think this content deserves to go further. So if you can help with that, that would be brilliant. Mark has shared his YouTube channel and podcast channel with you. He's got 4 books. This is the most recent, Engaging Gen Z. So there's lots of resources if you want to find out much more about this topic. We've got some more conversations coming up after Easter. Our next one is on imposter syndrome with Caroline Flanagan and Sajna Rahman. I should have checked the date and time before I went live. I think it's next week. Keep your eyes open for that. That'll be great. Have a wonderful Easter. I hope you haven't been fooled today. And I will see you again soon. Chrissy, thank you so much. Chrissy was listening while walking around your local park, enjoying the sunshine, which I haven't been able to do. Glad you enjoyed it, Chrissy. And have a great Easter.